I'm glad that India expanded its booster dose to include all adults, but to date, only 2.8% of the country's 940 million adults have received a booster dose. So I think anyone who is eligible for a booster shot should go and get it.
Hi, you're watching Hindustan Times Insight, and I am with our editor-in-chief, Sukumar Ranganathan. Now, it's been 2 years since Prime Minister Modi went on national television to declare that India would go into a complete lockdown. At that time, there was some level of optimism, perhaps that such an isolation will break the chain of infection. 2 years later, and after several lockdowns and a traumatizing second wave, we all know better. The third wave, led by the Omicron variant, was relatively mild, and which has actually led to very largely to a lot of complacency amidst a lot of people with regard to the virus. But that complacency will be dangerous given what is happening now. For the third straight day in a row, India has recorded more than 2,000 new cases of COVID-19, and now 2,000 cases may appear minimal for many of our viewers. They may not appear a huge jump for many of our viewers, but we have seen it before how this multiplies. Sukumar, please take us through why many people who've gone complacent should not be complacent by these numbers.
I think what we are seeing now is a different phase of the pandemic. In fact, it's been different from the time Omicron emerged itself. Until Omicron emerged, it made sense to look at metrics like daily case numbers and infection rates, and positivity rates, not infection rates, because I think some of those were a little more fatal. They were causing more hospitalizations. Omicron is much more infectious, and it's for its variants. But so far, the evidence that we have on hand doesn't seem to suggest that it is resulting in a sharp spike in either hospitalizations or in the fatality rate. Given the level of vaccination that India has achieved, right, the entire adult population is fully vaccinated. They've not got boosters yet, and we'll come to that in a bit. But given our level of vaccination, I would think that it makes no sense to track case numbers, makes no sense to look at positivity rate. The only numbers we should be looking at are hospitalization rates and the death toll. Also does not make sense to shut anything down, which is why I think the Delhi Disaster Management Authority took a good decision to keep schools open. So I think, and we will come to that in a bit, because I know that a lot of parents still remain very, very worried about infections in children. What is needed at this point in time is that people go back to some of the basics. And the most primary among these is the use of masks. I think a lot of states and union territories missed a trick by removing their mask mandates a little too early. The cases went down, they got complacent, they thought everything was over. So as a result, when your activities are returning to normal, when offices are open, when schools are open, when malls and restaurants and multiplexes are open and people are moving around, and suddenly you tell them you don't need to wear masks, so everyone takes off their masks, you are bound to see a spike in infections, and that's what you're saying. So it does not make any sense to remove the mask mandate. And what is the other thing that people can do? I think schools, malls, any closed space, the people in charge should really be looking at ventilation. Many countries around the world have done it. Even in India, there are a lot of specialists who've emerged over the last 2 years who are focusing on ventilation, simply because this is an airborne virus, and if you crack down on ventilation, or you make sure that the right kind of ventilation is there, I think things should be all right. And the third thing is, I think people should just be careful about where they are hosting large events. You either need to host it in open air, or you need to host it in a really ventilated place. And in general, I think, you should actually not try to have a closed door event with 1,000 people or 2,000 people or even 700, 800 people. I'm sure you can scale them down. And I think if these things are done, even the infections won't go up. Because uh, why am I saying all this? After having said that, it's not, it doesn't even need hospitalization, it doesn't result in fatalities. It's because even though the strain of the virus that is currently seems to be going around most parts of the country is mild, it does result in fever. In many cases, the fever is high. It does result in body ache. We are beginning to see symptoms such as diarrhea. So it causes disruption in the daily work of people. And these are people who've just started going back to work or going back to school. So you're seeing that disruption. In addition, because this is such an infectious variant, affects their family members. So just causes disruption in life, in work, in academics. And it's a disruption that all of us can do without after 2 years of suffering the pandemic and, stop, start kind of thing, right? I mean, you start everything and then, a second wave happens and then you have to stop everything again. So it makes no sense to do the kind of things that makes you vulnerable to infections, which is why I'm going to go back and repeat myself: masks, ventilation, and avoid crowds.
You said masks, ventilation, avoid crowds, but keep it business as usual. That's for the people. But another thing that I think maybe you just tell us the importance of booster doses at this point, because India has said that all adults can go ahead and get their booster doses. How important are booster doses in this entire framework?
Extremely important. I know there have been several irresponsible statements on booster doses by people. I personally read a few comments about how there is no evidence in favor of booster doses and how they may not really be needed given the high level of seroprevalence that India has. And sure, India does have a high level of seroprevalence because a lot of people were exposed to the virus. But we all know that a natural infection does not result in immunity that lasts for far too long. We also know from research that a third shot of the vaccine provides additional immunity, additional protection against hospitalization, against death. And if you can have that protection, I see no reason why people shouldn't want that protection. I'm glad that India expanded its booster dose to include all adults, but to date, only 2.8% of the country's 940 million adults have received a booster dose. So I think anyone who is eligible for a booster shot should go and get it.
I think that's a question on everyone's mind, really. This thing you mentioned about the future variants? Omicron is mild. Thank God for that. But what about the future variants? What does science say about that?
There will be future variants. We have no way of knowing whether they're going to be milder or stronger. But what we do know from science is that if you have a third shot, you will be protected more than you would otherwise be protected. Then, of course, the natural question to ask is, will we need a fourth shot? At this point in time, there is no evidence to suggest, no strong evidence to suggest that you will need a fourth shot. You may just be able to do it with 3. But who knows? I mean, from next year onwards, you may well require annual shots for COVID, just like you have annual shots for flu. But it's important to realize, important to recognize, even if future variants are mild, that COVID is not going to go away. I know that countries such as China have a COVID zero policy, and we all can see what's happening in China. It's not worked very well for them. We have to learn how to live with this, and part of learning how to live with this is to protect ourselves and our health and to ensure that there's no great disruption. So if that means everyone's going to have to take an annual shot, right now it's not clear, then so be it. It'll just be part of the regular drill. And I guess we all have to get used to it.
What are the precautions that children should be taking as of now? Because they are the ones who are actually not vaccinated going out to schools.
Good question. And extremely good question, because I get asked this a lot too. And there are parents who are obviously very, very paranoid about this, and understandably so. No one wants their children to be affected by COVID. But the fact is, as you were pointing out, there is a virus, and there are children who are unvaccinated, because no one under the age of 11 is vaccinated in this country. Yesterday, the subject expert committee of the drugs regulator approved its second vaccine for children in this age group. But even the first vaccine, while approved by the subject expert committee, has not really been incorporated into the vaccine drive by the drugs regulator. So there is no vaccination for children under the age of 11. But what we do know from science is several things about how children react to this. The first one is that young kids are not particularly susceptible to symptomatic infections. The second one is that they are even less likely to require hospitalization. Their immune system seems better equipped to fight off this virus. So I'm not saying that children should necessarily get ill, but I'm just saying that this is what science tells us. So if schools do enough in terms of ventilation, enough in terms of masking, and enough in terms of ensuring that children do not crowd around, I think it's relatively safe. So we have to keep schools open. There is no scientific or health reason to shut schools now. And while it may be a brave decision that DDMA has taken, it's also, I think, the best decision that it could have taken at this point in time. Life has to go on, education has to go on, livelihoods cannot be compromised. I think these three things we have to acknowledge.
Okay, life has to go on, education has to go on, and livelihoods cannot be compromised. And so what you're really saying is that we have to live with the virus, and when living with the virus, of course, right now, at least from the evidence you say we have, masks, ventilation, and that booster shot is a must for everyone. I think thank you so much, Sukumar, for all those insights, and I hope viewers at least if nothing compels you to go and get that booster shot, because as Sukumar was pointing out, we're barely at 2-point-something% as far as penetration of the booster shot is concerned. Thank you for watching this broadcast. Stay tuned to Hindustan Times for more updates.